All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. It's a little strange for me that people want to come hear what I have to say, but we'll roll with that. So I'm thinking to make this actually useful instead of a madman rambling. I thought maybe a Q&A format might be the thing to do. So anybody ever want to ask a boffin anything about audio? Yeah, man.
I mean, first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay. My mom was a music therapist, a music teacher in the 70s, and my stepdad was a transducer engineer for JBL in the 70s. And grew up doing a lot of festival work for the Grateful Dead and the film industry. And so literally I grew up in production since I was like 3 years old. Went out working and decided I really liked the underground. Not as much money, but it's people like us, you know. It's trying to use entertainment to reprogram and deprogram instead of program. So started getting into doing a lot of parties, free parties and whatnot. And then the kind of thing we did started to catch on, you know. So started doing festivals, Coachella, Lightning in a Bottle, Infrasound, you know, all over the place, Dipper and Friends. And it's just been a really wild ride seeing the music that you grew up in and believe in kind of catch on. I don't know, it's different than selling out. It's like, you know, people finally get the ideas that the music represents, you know. So that's basically who I am, you know. I guess professionally I've worked for a lot of people. It'd probably be easier for me to tell you who I haven't worked with a dozen times than who I have. I just really, this is a great party. This is one of the best parties that happens in the United States. So I'm happy to be here, seriously. And you all make it, man. This is your party. So that's kind of me, in a nutshell. Who's next? Okay, not a lot of questions then. Okay, well, okay.
So could you tell us a little bit about these speakers and like do you have like in comparison to like other brands of speakers, like what might make these better in a certain situation versus
Okay.
a different brand that you hear in like a nightclub or something like that?
Most of the commercial speakers that are made by major brands are made for reasons other than sound. Really, it's a lot of people making major investments get real scared of those investments, and so if you go with this major brand, no one ever got fired, you know, suggesting to go that way. But because there's so much money riding on every little thing, there's not a lot of actual innovation, because to innovate means to take chances. And form follows function, so if you come out with something that does something different and better than everyone else, it's going to look and feel different, and people don't recognize it. And people will tell you they want something new and different all the time, but the truth is if you really give them that, they don't know what to make of it, because it doesn't fit their card catalog image of whatever it is it should be. So a company, sadly, like JBL, used to be great. They innovate now by putting another stripe on the box or changing the handle or something like that, or, you know, license a driver from somebody. A company like Hennessy, small people, they know they're not going to make money. The only real satisfaction they're going to get out of what they're doing is to know that they did something different that's better. All right, so there's that. The other thing is most of the time, what's really important getting a system in and out of a place is not how great it is, but how well it comes in and out of the place. Are you going to really wear out for people getting in and out? So the audio performance of all the speakers is seriously compromised by the truck pack capabilities of it. And this stuff don't fit in a truck. These battle axes, those are like what, 240 pounds a piece, something like that. What are those? 320 each.
About 5 foot by 5 foot by 2 foot.
Yeah, and it's maddening because you can get 3 of them across a truck, but there's a foot left, and everything wants to run. So you don't want to like take them around, but people do, because they're the only bass horns that are, most of the concert bass that you hear and see set up from major manufacturers is not made to be used onesie twosie. It's made to be used in dozens, and it doesn't start to perform until you use dozens of it sitting there together, especially with bottom end. You might have a couple of subs that will hit 45 hertz by themselves. You get 15 of them together, and all of a sudden you can kind of bump up that bottom, and it flattens right out, and you get those deep subterranean notes that you want. The Hennessy bottoms, those are 27 hertz bass horns by themselves, so each one of them is flat to 20 hertz just in singles, or 30 just in singles. So put together, this 4 with 1 watt of input will make 125 dB down at 25 hertz with 1 watt. So it's extremely sensitive, and it makes it possible for us to bring an experience like this in literally on our backs into the woods like this. The components that get used tend to be a little different. Also, some of the majors can design their own drive units and get their performance that way. These guys are using off-the-shelf components and trying to use really innovative designs to get their performance, kind of like Danley. All the stuff in a Danley box is off-the-shelf, but their brilliant is in their design. These cannons, the mid-bass horns, most of the Function 1 stuff that you see, or Danley or whoever, it's a folded design. Those are straight. There's a lot less distortion, and you can see the magnet structure of the driver. It sucks cool air. One of the problems a lot of people experience with smaller PAs is, if you ever notice at these events, things start out feeling good at the beginning of the night, but as the night gets on, people have to make things louder and louder, and it always gets rattier and rattier feeling. Well, that's because of what's called power compression. And that just means that as the speakers heat up, you put power through the coil, it's like a light bulb. Some of them get red hot. And as it heats up, the electrical characteristics change, and you can't get power into the speaker anymore. You put power into it, but it no longer translates into cone motion, right? So the more efficiency you can get, the less electrical power you have to use, the less power compression you have, and the system stays loud all night, and you're not having to chase it into distortion in order to get it to be okay. The downside of that is, when things are smooth, all the cues that you get that your system is telling you things are loud, your body listens for distortion. And when it starts to creep in, it's this hard sound and it feels loud. And a lot of DJs in particular will respond to that and go, okay, I know I'm loud now. But you can be at the same level without that distortion, and it just doesn't feel like that. And I was saying to a friend of mine last night, that's cool, but that's also insidious, because you're killing your hearing and you don't realize it because it's smooth. If it sounded good up here last night, I'm glad, but 20 minutes in this and you're doing permanent threshold shift. So I'm trying to make it so that that threshold shift is at least smoothly all the way across the board, so it doesn't diminish your capacity to hear Fs and S's and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm hurting you, but hopefully it's in a way that you can live with better. Yeah. One of the things I want to touch on while I've got everybody here is there's so much marketing in this. I feel like one of the things that I can help people with is sort of how to decipher, like, you've got really top shelf brands and top shelf technology, and it's $20,000 a box. There's $150,000 worth of audio gear out here, and normal people can't afford that. So how do you maximize your experience? What do you look for in smaller stuff that we can all deal with? So what I'm going to say is, Evan asked me to give him advice on picking some stuff to take to the playa, for example. So what I want to talk about real quick is, how do you choose this shit? What's important? First thing I said is efficiency. How much sound will the speaker make with a single watt of power? all things being equal, the less power you have to use to get the job done, the happier everything is. You use less generator, you make less heat, everything lasts longer, everything feels better. So if you're using a self-powered speaker, it's not quite as important because it gets down to how much power your amp runs. But the more efficient speakers also tend to have more detail to the sound. If you think about it, an inefficient speaker gets a real fast fleeting transient, it's just going to burn it up as heat. It's not going to turn that into any motion, but a very efficient mechanical system will turn that into motion. So you hear more of the detail of the sound. It's one of my personal issues with Void Acoustics. Except for two of their products, if you really start listening to that stuff compared with Function One or Danley or a really well set up acoustics rig or something like that, it's loud, everything's there, but you can't see into the music with it. I don't know exactly how to put it. It's sort of like, just not quite there, except Incubus. Incubus is as good as it looks. It's just god awful expensive. So efficiency, the next thing is the processing. You'll hear, we have DSP on board, DSP, FIR, lots of buzzwords. It's possible to correct now for a lot of acoustic anomalies that you used to have to spend a lot of money to mechanically build things to overcome. Now we've got lightweight boxes out of plastic, we've got other composite materials. For $1,000, you can get a pair of speakers now that embarrass what you used to spend 10 grand on. Companies buy other companies. There was a company in France called Nexo. Yamaha bought Nexo. So if you buy, 10 years ago, if you bought inexpensive Yamaha Club Series speakers or whatever, that was gross, it was garbage. Now, if you buy inexpensive Yamaha powered speakers, that's all designed by the Nexo team in France. It just has Yamaha's badge on it and it punches way above its weight class. So it's good to know that sort of thing. The other thing, I guess, is ruggedness, reliability, weatherproofing. Most of the inexpensive speakers that we're going to take out into the woods or onto the playa, they're not really well weatherproofed, but that's okay. You can do it yourself. There's a website called Parts Express, partsexpress.com. Some of you probably know about it. It's a hobbyist website. They got all kinds of stuff. They write the light controllers, like Arduino-based L-wire controllers. It's all kinds of stuff, but specifically for audio, they've got this stuff called Wet Look, and you paint it on your speaker cones, and take the driver out, paint both sides of it with this stuff, because imported speakers, both sides of it, $15, and all of a sudden your shit's UV protected, water protected, it can get rained on, whatever, you're not going to ruin your speaker. Bang, $15, it's hardened, it's great, and it'll sound better too. Subwoofers.
Do the QSCs need that?
No, the QSCs don't tend to need that. They're a little bit better about that kind of stuff. The Mackie does, the QSCs don't. The K-Array stuff doesn't, and the Nexo Yamaha stuff doesn't. Music Tribe took over Turbo Sound and has relaunched Turbo Sound. And Music Tribe was Behringer, and they built a new factory in China. Rail cars come up on one side of it, and audio gear comes out the other side. It's a strange world. Yuli Behringer fucking friended me on Facebook, and we actually do talk from time to time. The reason he made the reissue of the Oberheim and the PPG 2.3 that's coming out, but you didn't know there was a 2.3 coming out. Yeah, they're gonna make a 2.3 with the real Curtis chips. And what he explained to me was that in the day, they used to buy a bunch of cheap shit because that was all they did was clone everything. But now they actually own all the brands that they used to just clone shit from. And they have to buy high-end electronics for real Midas consoles. A Midas Pro X is still 120 grand. And it's good. So they have to buy high-end components from that. He said, can you imagine a company our size having to manage 4 different supply lines of different quality tiered components to make the billions of things that we make? That's just insane. He said, we costed it out. It made a lot more sense to just buy one line of components that were premium for the premium brands, and we put them everywhere. So, hate to have to say it, but the stuff they're making now is not exactly crap anymore. And you can go a long way with that. They've resuscitated the Turbo Sound brand, which Tony Andrews started. He became Function One. That's kind of why Turbo quit being a thing, got to be Function One. But Music Tribe's resuscitated that, and they're making some really nice stuff, like I think $500 for a stage wedge that you can put on a pole and use with a sub, and it's amazing. It really is. It's amazing for the money. So it's a really good time to get inexpensive audio gear that works really well. But to kind of piggyback on his question, sort of what makes this different than Function One? Function One doesn't use actual horn-loaded bass systems. Those are actually bandpass enclosures, which is sort of a type of a vented box. It's closed behind it, and there's another box in front of it with a port, and the port is on a horn flare. Onesie, twosie, they don't work. Get 20 of them together, they start working. That's the main difference between Function One and Hennessy. Otherwise, the same sort of acoustic efficiencies there. Just some different caveats. I look at Danley, Henny, Function One as being kind of on the same shelf. They just lean a little differently. If you're a good engineer, you can get the result you want out of whatever. It's just some people, the way they think and work, it's easier to get there with this stuff and its set of trade-offs than it is to get there with this stuff and its other set of trade-offs. I mean, you know, I don't know. I'm tired. I don't want to ramble. Who's next? Anybody got any more questions?
So when you're producing music on like a system like this, like what are the types of things that you would do more specifically for like, you know, like quadraphonic sound versus like other setups?
Okay, I think I kind of see where you're going with this. One of the biggest issues I have if you're a music producer or artist is the level that you mix the tracks at and the systems that you use on it. Most of the time when you're making a film or a movie or a record to be played on the radio or something like that, you monitor about 83 dB average, and that's because your hearing curve is the flattest. Two scientists, we'll call them Doctors Fletcher and Munson, discovered back in the 40s that your hearing is not the same level across the spectrum. Let's assume for a second that our higher selves designed our vehicles that we drive here to protect us from danger down here. Everything here on Earth that'll kill you fast, the lion rustling in the grass, the cobra hissing, all of that's at 4 kilohertz, and that's where our hearing is the most sensitive. So if you have an equalizer, that's why you tend to cut it there. It's because we don't need that much power there. We've concentrated our horsepower there. The highest frequency thing in nature that'll do you dirt's a mosquito. That's about 8 kilohertz. So sort of like your visual cortex concentrates all your resolution on a space about like this, and in your peripheral vision you see motion but not really detail. Your brain conserves its horsepower. Well, it does that with audio too. There's nothing in the bass range that will really kill you that's not super powerful, like a stampede or an earthquake or a rock slide. So we're not sensitive to bass really either. So my pet peeve is when people will record heavy music, like heavy metal or hard rock or music like this, and they'll monitor it at 83 dB because the textbook says, well, this is where our hearing is the most flat, and so your mixes will translate more in when it's made at this level. Well, that's cool if you're going to play it back at that level, but if you know your tracks are going to be played out here at 105 dB, that EQ curve that you've put on it no longer works. So I like to think of it as a target sound pressure level. When I come out and do something like this, there's a certain SPL, sound pressure level, that I want to hit, and I'll set the system up to feel right at that level based on what your hearing curves are doing at that level. Come out lower than that, and it's weak sauce. It doesn't hit, it's not. Come out hotter than that, and it's taking your head off. It's not right. Keep it right in that pocket, and it sounds just right, right? So I think that's the main thing that I would say that you pay attention to when you're making tracks for something like this, is what's the intended playback environment. I did a record project for a blonde singer who will for now remain nameless. And I mean, she's a famous blonde singer, but I knew the target market was not going to be people listening on speakers. It was going to be little kids with earbuds going around the city doing their thing. So what I did was went around with a Zoom recorder and recorded city noise, construction, traffic, everything, you name it. And I put a low pass filter on it at about 6K to kind of mimic having earbuds in and hearing all that noise filtered through the earbuds. And I stuck that in my monitor path at about -30 when I was mixing the track. So I'm mixing the track around all this city noise so that my effects and certain things wouldn't be subtle and get lost. And that really worked. So, consider the playback environment. If you're gonna make something to be played back loud, mix it loud, and just understand it's gonna suck if it's not played back loud. Yes, sir.
How do you mix like subharmonic, like sub 20 frequencies? Like how do you handle that when you're setting up the mixes?
I tend to think of sub 30 hertz bass as modulation material. It's not so much bass anymore. Under 30 hertz, you don't hear it as bass. You feel it as a pressure wave. And originally, that kind of bass was present in organ music. And back in the day, you'd have organs that were designed for specific spaces, and those spaces would have particular echo signatures. And so some of these classical pieces, some of the Vivaldi, some of the Bach specifically, were written to be played in specific cathedrals with those specific delay signatures. And so arpeggios that are written as arpeggios and sound like that out here, you play it back in the hall it was designed to be played in, those arpeggios become held, sustained chords because of the acoustics in the hall. So a 16 hertz organ pipe, which is 30 feet, 16 cycles per second, that's just you don't feel it, it's not bass, but it will rhythmically modulate everything else that's on top of it. It sort of squeezes or lets breathe, depending on whether you're coming in or out. So most of the time for amplified music, nothing below 25 cycles, really not much below 30, because you're just wasting power. Nobody's got anything that'll do anything with that energy. But something like Henny's, yeah, you can do 20 hertz drops, but just realize it's not going to be effective like you think. I could put 20 hertz bass out here right now at 140 decibels, and none of you would know it was happening until I started talking, and it sounded like this because it's modulating my speech. So the thing about bass is that it's not actually the deep bass that people really respond to. What people think of as bass, especially in house music, is 50 to 150. That's the golden area. You can kind of have it better to not have the sub bass that doesn't work than to have farting noises down there. All that being said, it's been found that if you have true sub bass, it makes the feeling more satisfying at a lower level, and people tend to not turn things up as much if you do have the presence of true sub bass. It's just a lot more satisfying that way. So that's kind of how I look at all that.
Can you talk specifically to what we're doing here in Sonic?
Okay. You guys are all pros. You've probably been in four corners a lot in your lives, right? You've heard lots of four corner setups, probably. Yeah, no, okay. Well, typically what happens with four corners, if you have stereo, is you'll have left and right, and then these two channels just get reversed so that things kind of do this. And a lot of times they'll put a tweeter array in the middle because it phase interfaces and it phase interacts with all those channels, and it makes the top ends all swirly and psychedelic, and it's a cool effect. you don't have it in there all the time. You just kind of turn it on whenever there's stuff going on that plays with that. The thing about that is there's no correlation between those channels. And just like waves in the ocean, you may have 2 or 3 20-foot waves that all of a sudden add up to give you a 100-foot monster. Well, that happens with sound. And that's why in most of the environments you're in, even if it's mostly smooth, there are all these piercing moments that happen that just kind of just get you. Well, that's nonlinear wave function adding up. What I'm using here is a process designed by the late Dr. Michael Gerzon called ambisonics. There's a couple of different ways you can go about it. One field of ambisonics is used a lot in video game production. It uses a sound field microphone, which is a 6-element mic, and you put it on with headphones and you're there. I mean, it's pretty nuts. We're using high order ambisonics to correlate what the speakers are producing, so that no speaker is able to produce information that's out of phase with any other speaker at any time. So that's the thing I'm using to stabilize the sound field, which is why even though it was cranked up, you didn't have those piercing moments, last night. So that's one thing. The second thing I'm doing is crosstalk cancellation. When your left ear can hear the right channel and your right ear can hear the left channel, it collapses your stereo image, and it can make some parts of your mix actively just go away altogether. That's why you listen in mono when you're producing things. So everybody has essentially the same width of head. Big people, small people, our heads are all about the same width. So based on the width of the average human head, I'm cross-feeding left and right signals out of phase, but timed in a certain way so that it's canceling your crosstalk that you get. Does that make sense? So cleaning up the actual stereo to start with. Then I'm extracting the stereo stuff, left minus right. Real easy way to illustrate this would be go home. If you've got a stereo receiver with a pair of channels, just take a third speaker and stick it between the 2 hot terminals and put it in the back behind you and see what that does to the image. The same sort of thing. I get all the stuff that's different from left and right and get it by itself and selectively reintroduce it to the rear channels. So you'll notice, even though I'm just doing a stereo up mix from what people are doing, there's stuff that only appears from the rear channels. So it's a pretty intelligent thing. We got 200 modules in the plug-in. Took 5 years to write. Yes, sir.
What happens if you do that? If you put a mono in the back as a triangle?
Well, that's not exactly a mono in the back. If you look at mathematically what's going on, it's a differential operation. It's actually quadratics on this side, quadratics on this side, and a differential comparison of those. So you have to have your normal stereo speakers connected or this will blow your amp up, right? But just go between the 2 hots. It's, in essence, it causes everything that would be in both channels to cancel. And what comes out of the speaker is only what would be the difference between the left and the right channels. And so if you put that in the back, it interacts with the front channels in such a way that you don't really hear a speaker in the back. You just, all of a sudden, you're in this 3-dimensional stereo field. It's like hyper stereo all of a sudden. It's just 3-dimensional stereo. And it's a lot smoother because a lot of the interactions that would normally collapse the image are being canceled by that third speaker that's there. And so this is a little bit more sophisticated way of doing that at home, but try that at home or at your small parties that you do. Just give that a shot. It's pretty wild. It doesn't have to be a big speaker to go back there in order to make this happen either. So yeah, I would give that a shot the next time you. No, literally at the power amp, just speaker cables between the 2 reds. As long as you have your other 2 channels connected, your amp will be stable, it'll handle it. But yeah, just bridge between the 2 hots. It's neat. It's neat like that, yeah. Wow, anything else? Anybody else want to know anything specific?
Other than this, what's the
next best event in the US?
I don't know, man. I don't know, honestly, man. There's different events that you go to for different reasons. You go to Lightning in a Bottle because it's basically the warm-up for Burning Man. You'll see a lot of really cool art, a lot of really major installations, and a lot of artists that come with super prepared sets. And you go to Tipper and Friends for the music. You never know exactly who he's going to put on because he really means the and friends part. He'll put on people that you've never heard of before that have been playing for 20 years that'll fucking blow your mind. And, so you go there for that. I like this because of you. I like this because of this party. Lee Burge told me something a long time ago. He's like, Bill, the thing you got to understand about house music and house people, house parties is, we're all there kind of for the music, sort of. But the music's kind of really there for us. It's about us. It's about us enjoying ourselves. And you don't ever want the sound of the music to step on that. You always want it to accentuate that. So he explained to me how a really good house DJ will weave in and out of focus. He'll throw in, or she will throw in a few songs that shuts everybody up and you just kind of pay attention and dance, and then he'll let you kind of go back into your bubbles and you hang out and conversate a little bit until you're ready to come back and be serious again. And that whole ebb and flow and interaction, I mean, to me, that's to me what makes APOG special. This festival doesn't have an identity, so you're not trying to be anything, you just are. It's beautiful. So, trying to think what else. Working with generators out in the woods and things like this. How many times have you gotten out and you need more power and you need to aggregate generators? Have you guys ever aggregated multiple generators? Okay, only a few of them will do it. The Hondas are what I'm going to recommend. Basically, all you have to do with those gennies is connect the ground and connect your powers, and it senses that there's another generator online, and it'll phase lock the two outputs and parallel right out. So that's neat. Another thing you can do is a lot of these small generators are loud as all get out. They just don't have good mufflers on them or anything. So what you do is go and get a car muffler and hose and size down and literally just stick a fucking car muffler on that generator and it'll make it more quiet than that whisper watt. It's cheap. Doesn't take much to do that. So I would suggest doing that as a little hack. Trying to think what else to do. Yeah.
Where do you see audio going in like the next 25 years? Like what, from your perspective, do you want to see? Like where do you think it should go?
I'll add a piece to that. You may have noticed that he has come out with something very similar to Danny's point source becoming
Well, I think to piggyback on what you guys are saying, I think, everything we're into mimics what the human race overall does. And the human race went through this phase of big, I want big events. I want a lot of people to be part of this because I'm insecure enough about my identity that I can't really feel that good about it unless I've got all these other people telling me that this is good. And so the results that we get are these events where you go to and you're like watching these fleas jump around on stage, and it's just this inhuman, depersonalized kind of thing. And what I feel like the human race is being forced to get back in touch with is the power of genuine experience. And that doesn't always, in fact, it almost never comes from giant impersonal events. I think the era of the superstar is over. There's a superstar in every fucking crew now. Seriously, every sound system crew that I know of in the country, there's at least one person in there that is absolutely on the level. And so we have a unique opportunity in our history to use the fabric of electronica to help connect people instead of everybody driving across the country to get together in this group of 20,000 to see this superstar, stay home and see the superstar in your family. So I think the trends in sound systems are going to be more like this. This is big show quality. I mean, this is ridiculous production for a show in the woods, but it's what's important to us. So yeah, I think the trend is going to be that we're going to start seeing a lot more really high technology brought down into the smaller sector for smaller events like this, where I don't need 150 inputs on a console, but I want the same quality. So that's where I think it's going to go. It's geared for smaller and smaller, higher quality events, because it's one thing to bring out major production for a 10,000 head event, because the cost of that production and the expertise involved, you're not paying me for my weekend out here. Well, you're not paying anything at all. I actually donated my fee. I'm out here I paid $200 to come out here and do this. I love this. But my point is, it's no, man. It's impossible to get really high quality production in a small event without charging people $300 a head, because the gear costs the same. It's the same exact stuff that's being brought out. And if you've got to bring out a $150,000 console with $90,000 worth of amps and $20,000 worth of speakers, yeah, you don't need all of it for an event like this, but as a production company, you have to have bought all of it to even bring out some of it. So yeah, I'm hoping that I start to see higher quality, smaller systems, like from Function One, for example. My favorite PA speaker of all time is the TurboSound Floodlight. That's the first product from Tony Andrews and John Newsham that looked like Function One that everyone pictures. And they don't get as loud as the modern stuff, and they don't array as well. But there's nothing still to this day that's as sweet. I have to work in Evo to get it to the point where Floodlight just wants to be where it turns on. So I think the Evo X is, instead of like a 40-degree box, the trade-off is wide dispersion versus penetration. If you need to get high frequencies further out, you can't spread them out as far. You only have X amount of energy. And if you need it to be apparent 100 feet out, you can't spread it out, right? Smaller shows, though, require things to be spread out. These are 60-degree boxes. I'd actually rather have 90s, but we don't have them. So that's why the sound field is tight. You don't hear any of the top end until you get right down in it. It's got pattern control. But the Evo X is a wide box, and it's made for singles, smaller shows where you only need a couple of tops, but you need it to cover that 90-degree area. So we're starting to see more of that, and high quality self-powered, self-processed, self-contained systems. Any system like this comes with factory lock presets, but mostly it's, they bring me out, do everything in the amps so we can save it. It doesn't work like that. We're not out here tweaking the system. The system is set up properly. Like what we're playing right now doesn't have any EQ or filtering or anything. It's just faders up, nothing, straight. What we come out and do is fit the music to the system. So what I see in a lot of house music, and it's almost, I almost don't want to say anything, because as long as it stays like it is, we have a formula that works for that. But there's a certain, I don't know how to put it, a use of the top end that makes things particularly aggressive, especially with the hi-hats. A lot of the hi-hats in house don't happen up at 6 or 10K, they happen at 2K, And so it can be a little interesting. It can make things harsh. But I don't know. That's where I think things are going smaller. Things are going smaller. We're gonna have smaller events that feel bigger, I couldn't believe there's less than 300 people out here. It doesn't feel like that, does it, man? You know, so. I think another thing that's going to happen is lots of bastardization, hybridization. You know, there's a lot of talk about sound systems being optimized for particular kinds of music. People are like, well, I want to hear this on the Hennies, or I want to hear that on the Functions and all.
Sorry.
Is it bad? Oh, God. You never want to hear the sound of your own voice. Telling you, that's bad.
We all want to hear the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, now I know what a singer feels like. I always complain, hey, honey, as soon as you can hear yourself, that doesn't mean to back off. Okay, now I get it. Yes, sir.
So you don't want certain speaker systems to be set up for a specific genre? You don't like the future of that?
Not really, because it gets to a point where when I deal with a mixing system or a speaker system, I want it to be uncolored, I want it to be accurate, I want it to be transparent. And if it needs to lean a certain way, I'll make it lean that way. Now that's kind of the different mentality than a lot of club systems. A lot of club systems, Richard Long Associates, Gary Stewart, a lot of the New York, specifically house club systems, and you see a lot of them in Berlin too. They have a very particular sonic imprint. There's one thing those systems do well, and that is house music. Put anything else on them and it kind of falls apart. But for the specific thing, but it's done that way so that there's no maintenance. You don't have to have someone drive. It's a big fat gas guzzling Cadillac with a smooth ride that goes over bumps, and you don't have to be Mario Andretti to drive it. You know, it might not be the best thing in the world, but in that world, anything that allows people to be comfortable without a bunch of maintenance, that's the best thing, you know? When I did the Sullivan Room in New York, that was kind of a challenge because that wasn't just a house club. He'd have Marcus Wyatt and freaking, Jeff Mills the next night, and you walk in on a random Thursday and Machine Drum and Scorn are throwing down. So that was all over the place. And I thought, well, this is New York. There are engineers everywhere. I'll give them something to do. So I put a fatso in there and gave them some lakes, gave them some toys, and said, okay, guys, you can make this system lean any direction you want it to lean. You can make it hard as nails for techno. You can make it pillowy for house. You can make it analytical for ID. You can do whatever the hell you want. But what we found is that the engineers didn't want to mess with it. They just wanted to sit in the back and do coke and hang out. So I won't do another sound system like that has to be, tuned up and driven.
So are you doing that for sets this weekend? That are you riding it more like the Cadillac, or you're kind of just like, or are you between different sets and the different genres, like making slight subtle changes?
Well, last night was pretty easy because things were pretty consistent, honestly. All the artists were being really consistent with their levels, and the material was all in the same kind of vein. It was programmed, so once you kind of got things dialed in, it's just a question of bumping it up when the crowd's in, and when people kind of filter out, you have to bring it back down a little bit. The DJs aren't always cognizant of that, and the tendency is, well, we'll turn it up. Well, if there's only 5 people there and you're assaulting them, that's not comfortable. And so it's riding levels. But yeah, there are a lot of events where honestly it's harder to babysit a night full of DJs than it is to mix a band with 60 channels and effects and all, because the band will get to the point where it mixes itself. You get it set up and they start interacting, and then it kind of does its thing, and you just goose a reverb or a delay every now and again when it's fun. But yeah, a lot of the all-night parties, you have to be on it, if you want to keep it consistent.
I went from house to some techno in my set, and I was wondering if that changed, like if you were doing something in the back, right? You said like adding reverb and like different things. I just think it's a cool idea of knowing that like when you're standing here listening to this music right now this weekend. Like you're actually back there doing. Cool
Yeah,
shit to
I'm
make
back
everything
there.
sound
I'm back
like
there.
next level.
I'm not adding effects or anything. You guys are playing the
Yeah,
material, but like if I get a track in that it say for example the hi-hat's radically different, what I'm listening for is like, I'm not personally a dancer. I was a martial artist. When I feel music, I feel it in my hands. I want to make something with it. Dancers feel it in their hips. So I'm watching, I'm listening, and it's you know, you just have to respond to how you see people feel, you know, more than anything.
Yeah. So you don't just have one DJ up here; you have two. Someone
Yeah,
back there
sort of.
wants to play
But
lunch.
anything that goes on that starts to pull people out of that collective space that they're in, you know, like when you get a dance floor that's really happening, it's like a singular organism. You know, you all looking at each other, and the next thing that happens is the only thing that could possibly happen that would make any sense, you know, and it's like that. Anything that happens to pull you out of that, you have to address, you know. So that's and the other thing I'm looking for, honestly, and I don't mean this to sound like misogynistic or anything, but I look at women in the sound field. I don't mix for men. I do sound for women, and the reason why is because, well, number one, the hell else are we all out here for? Number two, number two, women have much more sensitive hearing than men. I wish there were more women in the audio industry because women are biologically much better equipped to be good audio engineers than any men are, and that's because you have a much lighter weight hearing mechanism. The bones that connect your tympanic membrane with your cochlea are much lighter weight. You have a much more delicate suspension. That means you tend to be bothered by sound things that guys don't hear. It's harsh for you, and you're like, how could this not be painful for you? No, you're fine. No, always pay attention to the women. They'll tell you if things are hard. They'll just watch the body language. You know, I had made a good observation last night. We were watching when I finally kind of got the mid-range happening and things got relaxed. Instead of moving like this, you know, people were, you know, people were, you know, loose, a little more relaxed, you know. So you gotta watch people. Yes, sir.
I got a comment. Something that I said to somebody standing next to me at one point was like, my ears are so relaxed right now.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, the bass was just like going right through my chest. And that to me is just like the creme de la creme.
Well, thank you.
So these things that you're doing in the background, is this EQ primarily?
A lot of it is I'm basically looking at what the level is versus how our hearing system is responding to the energy at that level. And a lot of what I'm doing is just keeping your hearing curve matched to the power response curve of the music. And so if I turn it down, typically I'll have to bring the top end up a little. If I turn it back up, I'll have to cut.
I mean, you get those 40 band EQs. What's a good piece of kit that like a regular person or one set of QSCs could take into the woods and get some of that effect?
The big third octave graphics and all. Stay away from those unless you're doing stage monitors. That's the only real use for those fancy third octave graphics. The reason those bands are on center frequencies they're on are called ISO standards, International Standards Organization. And it's really interesting because the center frequencies are chosen because it was observed that feedback in these electroacoustic systems only occurs in the middle of those center bands. It'll only ever happen at one of those frequencies. So if your monitor's feeding back, you can just grab that one thing and stop it. Well, tinnitus, some of you probably have ringing in your ears, tinnitus. Well, funny thing, those rings will only happen at the center of an ISO band. I have an 800 hertz tone in this ear. It's exactly 800 hertz. Yeah. Feedback and tinnitus work exactly the same way. So what I recommend is a parametric EQ filter. PreSonus makes an inexpensive one that's good because the op-amp chips in it are socketed and you can replace them with higher end ones and not void the warranty. It's really cool, and they're like $150. But they're called parametric equalizers because you can control where the booster cut happens, what frequency, and then you can control how wide the scope of that is. So you can program very comprehensive curves, but with only one electrical filter instead of 5 or 10 that are inserted to kind of approximate that effect.
How many parametric, channels do you think is the right number?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, for basic tone control, typical parametric EQs, typical EQs are 4-band, and you'll have a high and low shelf. When I say a shelf, that's like a bass or treble control. You've kind of got a corner turnover frequency, and then below that frequency, everything gets boosted or cut evenly. A peaking EQ is what you use in the mid-range, and it has a center frequency of booster cut, and it's a bell curve either way. And then there's another high frequency shelf on the top. That's pretty typical. I would go that way.
I mean, I assume like, a Behringer mixer, any of these digital mixers.
Oh, all the digital mixers. It's kind of a problem, actually. All these digital mixers, they have so many features that it's, unless you're a pro, you get lost and you don't need all those features. Did you have your hand up?
I was just wondering if you'd be willing to demonstrate a track with while you're adjusting it, so we could hear the difference.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know what you want to hear. So what you want me to do is like play something and unoptimized, and then optimize it and explain what I'm listening to. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can do that. Sure.
Wait, one more question.
Yeah.
One more question. What's your mom doing later?
Hooking up with you, apparently. Let's see. He needs to play something for us. Can you get Brady to play something for us?
Yeah, here, let me grab your mic for you. Take it off.
Well, they want me to talk about
main rigs and volumes in the sense of just turn some EJs up. We're going to turn it up a little bit now.
Yeah. All right. So we'll use Brady here as an example.